Don't worry, my friends. I know life can often feel like a maze filled with doors that seem locked or pathways that seem unclear. You look around and you wonder, when is my breakthrough coming? When will the door of opportunity finally open for me? But I want to remind you today, God has a plan for your life, and the right door will open at the right time. You see, we often get caught up in our own timing. We think, if this door doesn't open now, I must have missed something, or maybe I'm not good enough. But that's a lie. You haven't missed anything. You are right where you need to be. God, in His infinite wisdom, knows exactly when and where to place you. Every step you take, every door that closes, and every challenge you face is part of a larger plan designed just for you. Trust in God's perfect timing. Let me remind you of a simple yet profound truth. God sees the bigger picture. We are often consumed by the here and now, our immediate desires and the urgency of our current situation. But God, in His infinite wisdom, sees beyond today. He understands the challenges that lie ahead, the opportunities that are just around the corner, and the exact moment when we will be ready for them. Sometimes, the reason we have to wait is because God is preparing us, refining us, or aligning the circumstances in ways we can't see. Take, for example, the story of Abraham and Sarah. They received a promise from God that they would become the parents of many nations. But as the years passed, they grew older and their hope began to fade. Abraham was 75 when the promise was first given, and Sarah was well past the age of childbearing. Yet God had a plan. He wasn't just waiting for the right time to fulfill the promise. He was waiting for Abraham and Sarah to come to the place where they could trust Him fully. The birth of Isaac didn't happen until both of them had reached a point where they had to trust God completely. No more self-reliance, no more shortcuts. Their faith needed to be aligned with God's will, and His timing for Isaac's birth was perfect. Sometimes the delay we experience is God's way of strengthening our trust in Him. In our own lives, it can be easy to focus on the door that hasn't opened yet, to question why it's taking so long. But think about this. What if the delay is actually an opportunity for God to work on you? What if He's refining your character, developing your patience, or teaching you a deeper level of trust? Sometimes we can't see the growth that happens in the waiting. But just like a seed planted in the ground, the growth is often underground, hidden from sight until the right season arrives. Think of a tree. When it is planted, it doesn't sprout overnight. There's a process of growth. Roots are formed, the trunk strengthens, branches begin to stretch out. The tree doesn't rush the process. It's similarly, God is at work in our lives, even when it feels like nothing is happening. He's working behind the scenes, ensuring that when the door opens, we are strong enough to walk through it. Real life situations provide powerful lessons about trusting God's timing. Consider someone who is waiting for the right job opportunity. Perhaps they've applied to multiple positions only to be rejected. They may feel disheartened and question their worth, or wonder if they'll ever find the right fit. But then, one day, the perfect opportunity presents itself, one that aligns with their skills, passions, and purpose in a way they never imagined. In hindsight, they realize that the previous doors closing were not rejections, but redirections. If they had gotten that first job, they would not have been in the perfect position for the one that came next. Now, let me ask you, have you ever considered that the door you're waiting for might be delayed because God is preparing something better? The truth is, sometimes we settle for what we think we need, but God has something far greater in store. If we rush ahead, we might miss the fullness of His plan. The Bible tells us in Ecclesiastes 3:11, He has made everything beautiful in its time. God's plan for your life is being unfolded in the perfect timing, and every moment of waiting is part of the beauty of that process. You may not understand it now, but every season, every delay, and every closed door is contributing to the masterpiece He's creating in your life. When we trust in God's perfect timing, we can release the anxiety and the stress that comes from trying to force open doors ourselves. We can rest in knowing that He is in control. Trusting in God's timing means surrendering our need for immediate gratification and choosing to walk by faith, not by sight. It means believing that He has our best interests at heart even when the waiting seems long. So the next time you find yourself feeling anxious or frustrated, remember, God has not forgotten you. He sees your heart, He knows your desires, and He is working everything out for your good. Trust that the right door will open at the right time. And when it does, you will step into the fullness of what God has for you. Nothing too early, nothing too late, but exactly as it was meant to be. Stay patient, stay faithful. God's timing is perfect and He is never late. Setbacks are part of God's preparation. In life, setbacks can feel discouraging. We experience moments when everything seems to be going well, and then out of nowhere, something happens to halt our progress. We lose a job, face financial struggles, deal with broken relationships, or experience health challenges. These moments can be disheartening. We wonder, why is this happening? Why are things not going as planned? But let me remind you today, setbacks are often God's way of preparing us for something greater. They are not signs of failure or defeat, but part of the divine process that shapes us for our future. When you look at the story of Joseph, one of the most powerful biblical examples of overcoming setbacks, you'll see how setbacks can be stepping stones to God's greater purpose. Joseph had dreams of greatness, dreams where he saw himself in a position of leadership, with even his own family bowing down to him. Yet the path to his dreams wasn't a smooth one. Instead, Joseph faced betrayal by his brothers, being sold into slavery, and then thrown into prison after being falsely accused. Imagine the despair he must have felt. At times, he could have wondered, did I misunderstand my dreams? Did God forget about me? But God didn't forget about Joseph. Every setback, every moment of betrayal, rejection, and hardship was a part of the journey that prepared him for the moment when he would become second in command of Egypt. Joseph's character was being refined in the furnace of adversity. His patience was being tested. His leadership skills were being developed. And most importantly, his trust in God's purpose for his life was deepened. Joseph's story is a clear reminder that setbacks are not the end of the story. They are often the very thing that propels us forward. In our own lives, when we face setbacks, we must remember that God uses these moments to shape us, to teach us, and to prepare us for the future He has in mind. A setback doesn't mean you've been abandoned by God. In fact, it's in these moments of difficulty that God is doing some of His most important work in us. It's in these times that He is developing qualities in us, patience, perseverance, humility, and trust, that we would never fully experience without the challenge. Consider a time when you've been through something difficult, maybe a job loss or a personal crisis. In the moment, it felt like everything was falling apart. But after some time, as you reflected on the experience, you began to see how much you grew through the process. Perhaps it led you to a new career that better aligned with your purpose, or maybe it helped you build a deeper relationship with God. If you had never gone through that setback, you wouldn't be the person you are today. Real life situations provide countless examples of how setbacks lead to preparation for greater things. Think of an athlete training for a big competition. They don't just show up on the day of the event without hours of practice and conditioning. There are days filled with exhaustion, injury, failure, and disappointment. But these setbacks aren't a sign that they should quit. They are preparing their bodies, sharpening their skills, and teaching them resilience. The setbacks are part of the process that ultimately leads to victory. Likewise, in our spiritual journeys, setbacks serve a similar purpose. James 1:2-4 tells us, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. This passage reminds us that trials and setbacks are not for nothing. They have a purpose, they produce perseverance, and in the end, they make us more complete. Think about the growth of a plant. When a seed is planted, it doesn't just grow upwards without resistance. It faces pressure from the soil. It faces a struggle to break through the surface. But it's in that struggle, in that resistance, that the plant becomes strong enough to rise above the ground and grow. Without that resistance, the plant would never survive the external elements. In the same way, the challenges we face are what give us the strength to rise to the next level. The setbacks refine us, purify our hearts, and strengthen our resolve. Though at times it may be hard to see the purpose of the setbacks when we're in the middle of them. We may question, why is this happening to me? What is the lesson I am supposed to learn? But if we shift our perspective and trust that God is in control, we can begin to view these moments through a lens of faith. God is working in the background, orchestrating our lives in ways we may not fully understand, but He knows what He is doing. And here's an important question. If you never faced a setback, how would you ever know the strength and resilience God has placed in you? It's easy to say we trust God when things are going well, but it's in the hard times, the setbacks, where our true faith is tested. And through those tests, we discover the depth of our own character and the power of God's grace. Setbacks aren't the end of the story. They are part of the process. Trust that God is using every challenge to prepare you for something greater. Keep your eyes on His purpose for your life, knowing that every setback is just a setup for your comeback with God. Every setback can be a step toward the fulfillment of His plan. So don't be discouraged by the obstacles you face. Embrace them, knowing that they are part of the preparation for the greatness that lies ahead. The right door opens when you're ready. One of the most difficult parts of life is waiting for the right opportunity to come along. We often find ourselves at a crossroads, staring at multiple doors that seem to lead in different directions, wondering which one to take. The doors may represent job opportunities, relationships, or even spiritual growth. We might feel eager to step through one, believing it's the right time, but often the right door does not open until we are truly ready. And it's in these moments of waiting and uncertainty that we must learn to trust God's process, because the right door will open when we are ready to walk through it. Think about the story of David. When Samuel anointed him as king, he was a young shepherd boy, not yet prepared for the weight of the throne. God had a purpose for David, but the timing had to be right. Even though David was anointed king, he still spent years in the wilderness, fleeing from King Saul before he was able to step into his kingship. Can you imagine how frustrating it must have been for David? God had already called him to be king, but the door to the throne didn't open immediately. He had to go through seasons of waiting, learning, and growing. David was being prepared for the responsibility of leadership. He wasn't just waiting for the right door to open, he was being shaped and equipped for what was to come. In our own lives, we often find ourselves facing a similar situation. We might feel as though we've been called to something greater, whether it's a career change, a ministry, or a personal goal, but the door seems closed, and it's frustrating. However, just as with David, the door will open when we are truly ready. Readiness is not just about opportunity, it's about personal growth and preparation. God will not open the door until He knows we have the character, wisdom, and skills to walk through it and handle what lies on the other side. Consider a student who graduates from high school or college and eagerly looks forward to the next step, whether it's a job or further education. But if the student hasn't developed the discipline, time management, and skills needed for that next step, the opportunities that come may not be the right fit. It's not that the student isn't capable, but that they need more time and experience to prepare. The door to their future will open when they are ready to handle the responsibility that comes with it. The Bible reminds us in Romans 5:3-4, Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. This passage teaches us that the process of preparing us for the right door is not always easy. It can involve difficulty, suffering, and testing, but these are not meaningless. They are shaping us, building perseverance and character so that when the right door opens, we have the strength to walk through it. If we rush the process, we might not be ready to handle the blessings and responsibilities that come with it. God is a loving Father who desires the best for us. And He knows that if we are to fully enjoy and thrive in the opportunities He has planned for us, we need to be prepared. Just as a parent would not hand over the keys to a car to a young child who isn't ready to drive, God will not open the right door until He knows we have the maturity to handle the opportunities behind it. The right door will open when we are spiritually, mentally, and emotionally ready to walk through it. Real life examples of this abound. Think of someone who is eager to start their own business, but lacks experience or financial management skills. In their eagerness, they might rush into the venture only to find themselves overwhelmed by the demands of running a business. However, if they took the time to learn about the industry, build relationships, and gain experience, the door to success would open more naturally. They would be ready when the time comes. Similarly, in our spiritual lives, God is often preparing us for greater things. Many times we desire to walk into new levels of influence, success, but God knows that before we step into those areas, we need to deepen our relationship with Him, refine our character, and learn to trust Him in the process. We might feel as though we are stuck in a season of waiting, but in reality, God is at work in us, preparing us for the next step. Think about a child learning to ride a bike. In the beginning, the child may be eager to ride on their own, but without the proper balance, strength, or guidance, they might fall. The parent knows that the child is not yet ready to ride alone, so they provide the support and training needed to help them succeed. In the same way, God is our guide, ensuring that we are ready to handle the next season of life. When we trust His timing, we can rest assured that the right door will open when we are prepared to walk through it. And here's a question to reflect on. What areas of your life is God preparing you for? Are you focusing on personal growth, gaining wisdom, and building character? It's easy to become frustrated when the door doesn't open when we want it to. But we must ask ourselves if we are truly ready for what lies behind that door. Are we developing the qualities that will allow us to handle the opportunity with grace, humility, and responsibility? Trust that God's preparation in your life is leading you to a place of growth and readiness. And when the time is right, He will open the door that will lead you to your destiny. Keep your faith strong, keep working on your own growth, and trust that God knows exactly when the right moment will arrive. Don't rush ahead. Wait for God's direction. In life, there's often a temptation to rush ahead, to force things to happen, or to take matters into our own hands when things aren't moving as quickly as we'd like. We live in a world that prizes speed, whether it's fast food, instant messaging, or the quick results we expect from our hard work. It's easy to think that the faster we go, the closer we get to our goals. But sometimes, rushing ahead can be the very thing that delays our progress. God's timing is not the same as our timing, and waiting for His direction can often save us from costly mistakes. Consider the story of Abraham, the father of faith. God made a promise to Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. But after many years of waiting, Abraham and Sarah grew impatient. They decided to take matters into their own hands, and Sarah gave a servant, Hagar, to Abraham to bear a child. The result was Ishmael. But God's plan for Abraham was always to have a son with Sarah, and it wasn't until many years later that Isaac was born. Abraham's decision to rush ahead of God led to consequences that still affect the world today. Had he waited for God's direction, he would have avoided the conflict that arose from his actions. In our own lives, we face moments of impatience and we wonder why things are taking so long. We know the promises God has made to us, and we know He has a plan for our lives, but the waiting can feel unbearable. It's easy to become frustrated and take matters into our own hands. We may feel like God is moving too slowly or that we're running out of time. But what we don't always realize is that rushing ahead of God can often lead to us stepping outside His will, creating problems that could have been avoided if we had waited for His perfect timing. There's a story of a person waiting for a new job. They have the skills, the qualifications, and the ambition, but after months of waiting, they start to feel like they're not getting anywhere. The job opportunities aren't coming, and they start to feel overlooked. Out of frustration, they take a job offer that doesn't align with their goals or passions, thinking at least it's something. But later, they find themselves in a position that isn't fulfilling, draining their energy and passion. Had they waited for the right opportunity, the door that would truly align with their purpose, they would have been in a better place. In the Bible, the Israelites also faced moments of impatience. In the wilderness, after being freed from Egypt, they wandered for 40 years. They were waiting for the promised land, but it didn't come quickly, and they grew restless. At one point, they grew so frustrated that they turned to idols, seeking comfort and control over their circumstance. They rushed ahead of God's plan, and the results were disastrous. Their impatience led them further into the wilderness instead of closer to their promise. God's direction for them was clear, but their desire to control the outcome led them to detour into unnecessary struggles. It's easy to look at these examples and wonder why they couldn't just wait. But how often do we find ourselves in the same position? We know the promises God has given us, but when the waiting feels unbearable, we are tempted to rush ahead, to make things happen by our own strength, instead of trusting in His guidance. When we rush ahead, we are essentially saying that we don't trust God's timing, but God doesn't need our help to fulfill His promises. He doesn't need us to force things to happen. He has a plan that is unfolding, and we can trust that when we follow His direction, we won't have to rush. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 3:05-06, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. This is a promise that when we choose to wait for God's direction and follow His lead, He will guide us along the right path. And we won't have to try to make things happen on our own. Think about a farmer planting seeds. The farmer doesn't plant the seeds and then dig them up every day to see if they're growing. He doesn't rush the process. He waits patiently, trusting that the seeds will grow in their own time, as long as he provides the right environment for growth. If he tries to rush the process by watering too much, or pulling up the plants prematurely, he may destroy the crop. Similarly, in our lives, there is a season for everything, and rushing ahead before the time is right can hinder the growth that God is working in us. One of the key reasons God asks us to wait is to help us grow in trust and faith. Waiting allows us to develop a deeper relationship with Him, to rely on His timing, and to trust that He knows what is best for us. The longer we wait, the more we learn to trust in His wisdom and direction. And as we wait, we are shaped and molded into the people we need to be to step into the promise He has for us. Think about your own life. How many times have you tried to rush something only to find that it wasn't the right time? Perhaps you've made decisions in haste, hoping for quick results, but later discovered that waiting for God's direction would have been the better choice. What are you waiting for now? Are you trying to rush ahead of God, or are you trusting Him to open the door at the right time? The key to moving forward in God's will is not to rush ahead, but to wait for His direction. When we trust His timing, when we wait on Him to open the door, we can walk through it with confidence, knowing that it's the right door at the right time. Don't rush ahead. Wait for God's direction, and He will lead you to the place He has prepared for you. God is always working behind the scenes. There are times in life when we feel like nothing is happening, as if all our efforts and prayers are going unanswered. We face situations where we're waiting for a breakthrough, but all we see are closed doors and delayed promises. During these moments, it's easy to become disheartened, wondering if God is truly at work in our lives. But the truth is, God is always working behind the scenes, even when we cannot see it. His hand is guiding, orchestrating, and preparing things in ways that we can't always perceive. The key is to trust that even in the silence and the waiting, God is actively involved in our journey. Think about the story of Esther. She was a young Jewish woman living in exile, far removed from her homeland when she was chosen to be queen of Persia. At first glance, it might have seemed like a random turn of events, but God had a purpose in placing Esther in that position. The entire book of Esther shows how God worked behind the scenes, orchestrating every detail, even though his name is never explicitly mentioned. From Esther's rise to the throne to the pivotal moment when she had the opportunity to save her people, God was working in ways that no one could see. Even though Esther didn't know it at the time, God was positioning her for a moment of destiny. In our lives, it can often feel like we're in a place of waiting, wondering why nothing is happening. We pray, we work hard, we trust God, but sometimes it seems like the doors aren't opening and the breakthrough hasn't come. However, God's work is not always visible to us in the moment. He is working behind the scenes, arranging circumstances, opening doors, and preparing us for the future we cannot yet see. Consider the example of a person who has been seeking employment for a long time. They've sent out dozens of resumes, gone to interviews, and yet nothing seems to be working out. It's easy to get discouraged and think that nothing is happening. But what if God is working behind the scenes, preparing the perfect opportunity at just the right time? Maybe the company they've applied to has been waiting for the right candidate, or maybe there's a shift happening within the organization that hasn't been revealed yet. God is always working in the background, positioning things in our favor, even when we don't see it. One of the most powerful reminders of God's behind-the-scenes work comes from the life of Joseph. We all know Joseph's story. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. It seems like his life was falling apart, and there were many moments when it must have felt like God had forgotten him. But as we know, God was using those years of hardship to prepare Joseph for his ultimate position of leadership in Egypt. Each setback Joseph faced was actually a setup for his future success. God was working behind the scenes, even in the darkest moments, to fulfill his promise for Joseph's life. He couldn't see it at the time, but in hindsight, it was clear that God's hand was orchestrating everything for a greater purpose. When we're in the middle of a difficult situation, it's easy to forget that God is working behind the scenes. But just as a potter molds clay in the quiet of the studio, God is shaping us in the unseen moments. He's preparing us for the opportunities and challenges ahead, even when we don't fully understand the process. Think of a chef preparing a dish. The chef may be working quietly in the kitchen, chopping, stirring, and adding ingredients. At that moment, we don't see the final product. We don't know how the ingredients are coming together, but the chef is carefully crafting something delicious, even though we can't see the process. In the same way, God is crafting something beautiful in our lives. Even when we don't see the end result, we can trust that He is working behind the scenes. Sometimes we need to pause and reflect. Are we truly trusting God in the waiting? Are we believing that He is at work even when we can't perceive His hand in the situation? Let's take a moment to reflect on the times when God has worked behind the scenes in your life. Perhaps there was a time when you didn't understand why things were happening the way they were, but later you saw how everything worked out perfectly. Maybe it was a job that you thought was a setback, but it led to a better opportunity. Or perhaps a difficult relationship that taught you valuable lessons about trust and forgiveness. Those moments weren't accidents. They were God's work behind the scenes, orchestrating everything for your good. The Bible reminds us in Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. This verse reassures us that even when we don't see the big picture, God is working all things together for our good. Every challenge, every detour, every delay, God is using it to fulfill his greater purpose for our lives. The key is to trust in God's timing and his process. When we feel like nothing is happening, we must remember that God is always working behind the scenes, preparing us for what lies ahead. We may not see it now, but in time, we will recognize the work he's been doing all along. Trust that God is at work, even in the silence, and that the door will open when the time is right. So, as you continue your journey, remember, even when you can't see it, God is working behind the scenes. Trust his plan, wait for his timing, and believe that he is orchestrating everything for your good and his glory. Trust that God's plan is greater than your own. When we find ourselves facing uncertainty or waiting for a breakthrough, it's natural to lean on our own understanding. We analyze every situation, try to figure out the next step, and do everything in our power to make things happen. But the reality is that God's plan for our lives is often much greater than anything we could plan or imagine. In moments of doubt and frustration, we are reminded to step back and trust that God's plan is always better than our own, even when we can't see the entire picture. Think about the story of Joseph again. Joseph had big dreams as a young man. He saw himself as a leader, and in his youthful excitement, he shared those dreams with his family, only to face rejection, betrayal, and hardship. In his own understanding, he might have thought that his dreams would come true easily and quickly, but God had a greater plan for Joseph. His dreams were not just about personal glory. They were about positioning him to save a nation during a time of famine. Through his suffering, imprisonment, and eventual rise to power, Joseph's life became a testimony of how God's plan was far bigger and more intricate than he could have ever imagined. Joseph didn't know it at the time, but every hardship he faced was part of the process that would lead him to his destiny. Had he been in control of his own journey, he might have chosen a different path. But God's plan was leading him to a place of influence and leadership that Joseph couldn't have orchestrated on his own. There were moments of confusion, pain, and frustration, but Joseph chose to trust in God's plan, even when it seemed unclear. He learned that God's wisdom and understanding were far greater than his own. In our lives, we often find ourselves in situations that seem frustrating or discouraging. We may have a plan for our future, but things don't seem to be moving according to our timeline. We may not understand why certain doors are closing or why we're facing obstacles that we didn't expect. But God is not limited by our plans or our understanding. His plan for us is based on his infinite wisdom, and it encompasses not only our immediate desires, but also his eternal purposes. Think of a person who plans to take a particular career path. They have a specific vision for what they want, but doors seem to be closing, and opportunities that seemed perfect don't materialize. At first, they may be disappointed, even confused by the setbacks. But what if God is closing those doors because he has something far better in store? What if his plan for your life is leading you to a place of greater impact, joy, and fulfillment than anything you could have planned on your own? Sometimes we need to trust that God's no is just as important as his yes. His plan for us is not always aligned with our immediate desires, but it is always aligned with his eternal purpose for our lives. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 19:21, many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Our plans may be good, but God's plans are always better. When we align ourselves with his will, we are stepping into something far greater than we could ever create for ourselves. We may not see the full picture now, but we can trust that God, who knows the end from the beginning, is working everything together for our good. Think about the analogy of a puzzle. If we look at a single piece of a puzzle, it might not make sense in isolation. We can try to force the piece into the wrong place, but it will never fit. However, when we step back and look at the entire picture, the individual pieces fall into place. In the same way, when we trust God's plan, we are trusting that He sees the full picture, even when we can only see a small part. There may be moments of confusion, but God is fitting the pieces of our lives together in a way that we can't always understand. But in time, we will see how every piece fits perfectly into His plan. Jesus Himself was the perfect example of surrendering to God's greater plan. In the Garden of Gethsemane, facing the immense weight of the cross, Jesus prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." He knew the cost of what was about to happen, but He trusted His Father's plan. Jesus' obedience to God's greater plan led to the salvation of humanity. In the same way, our obedience to God's plan, no matter how difficult or unclear it may seem, will lead to something far greater than we could achieve on our own. Let's think about your own life. What are the areas where you are struggling to trust God's plan? Are there dreams, desires, or plans that you're holding on to so tightly, afraid that if you let go, you'll lose everything? Maybe it's time to surrender those plans to God and trust that His plan is greater. It may not look like what you envisioned, but it will always be better. Are you willing to trust that God's purposes will prevail, even when things don't go according to your plan? There's a beauty in surrendering our plans to God. When we trust Him completely, we are saying, "God, I trust that you know what's best for me. I trust that your timing is perfect and your plan is greater than anything I could imagine." When we surrender our will to His, we open ourselves up to His infinite wisdom and experience the peace that comes with knowing that He is in control. So in every situation you face, whether it's in your career, relationships, or personal growth, remember this: God's plan is greater than your own. Trust that He is leading you toward a future that is filled with purpose, even if the path doesn't look the way you thought it would. God is working everything together for your good, and His plan will always prevail. Trust His process and watch as He takes you to places you could never have reached on your own. As we conclude today, let us remember that life's journey is not always straightforward, but it is always divinely orchestrated. When we trust God's timing, His direction, and His plan, we can rest assured that He is guiding us toward the right doors at the right time. The waiting, the delays, and the moments of uncertainty are all part of a greater story that God is writing in our lives. Even when we can't see the whole picture, we can trust that He is working behind the scenes, preparing us for what lies ahead. In moments of doubt, remember that God's plan is always greater than our own, and His timing is perfect. He is always at work, shaping us, growing us, and positioning us for the right opportunities. So don't rush ahead. Trust that the right door will open at the right time, and have confidence that His plan for your life is unfolding beautifully, even when you can't see it. As you move forward, I encourage you to hold on to faith and trust the process. Embrace the waiting, knowing that God is preparing you for something extraordinary. Good luck on your journey, and thank you for taking this time to reflect on His promises. May you walk in His peace, His timing, and His perfect will. God bless you.